And we begin tonight with the vital role of women in American history, something especially celebrated during Women's History Month, which started this week. It is pretty remarkable when you think about it, the gains women have made since the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, when women, but really white women, secured the right to vote. Of course, women of color and black women had to fight decades longer to secure that right, until the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. The long fight for political equality surges on, but the gains, even in recent years, are the stuff of legend. Forever stenciled in the history books that we, except in Florida, are allowed to read. We have Kamala Harris breaking a two-century barrier as the first woman vice president, as well as the first black and Asian American in this office. We also have 4 women currently serving as Supreme Court justices, including the first black woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson. It's been 30 years since the Year of the Woman, when a record 47 women were elected to the House of Representatives. Women also won an additional 4 seats in the Senate. Those victories occurred after Senate confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas outraged many American women due to the allegations of sexual harassment against him. Sadly, he would not be the last Supreme Court justice accused of sexual violations of women. Hey there, Brett Kavanaugh. Leading us to the present day, when a Me Too movement, arguably predated by Anita Hill in 1991, continues to shake predators to their core, even putting some very powerful perpetrators behind bars. Back to the political world, to date, 59 women have served in the United States Senate, with 25 serving right now. A record 12 women are in governor's mansions, several of them in states that elected women for the first time, and some who, unfortunately, are eradicating their fellow women's rights as we speak. Which brings us to the flip side of all this progress. Alongside these breakthroughs for women and girls, for the first time since the 1970s, women's lives have been completely upended, our rights eroding at alarming and grotesque speed. Women have less bodily autonomy now than in most of our lifetimes, and in some states, none at all. The forced birth movement landed with a vengeance, and it is horrifying to witness the reality of that American dystopia after Roe. We have draconian laws designed to punish rape and incest survivors and that criminalize women who seek abortion care. In Texas, a bill that allows any private citizen to sue anyone who aids or abets an abortion. In the United States, in 2023, we have a Texas woman who said she carried a dead fetus for 2 weeks after her state's abortion ban. Another Texas woman was sent home from the hospital with instructions to return only if her blood filled a diaper more than once an hour. A woman was discharged from an ER in Ohio without treatment for her miscarriage, even though she'd been bleeding profusely for hours, filling the bottom of a bathtub and bleeding into her shoes. Let's just pause for a moment. These are people, perhaps someone you know, because miscarriages and complications are quite common. Many of these people are already suffering a loss, bleeding out, and in some cases dying, being sent home and told to wait or to do their own research, terrified with their hands tied for a party that claims to be about freedom, to be defenders of babies and children. What we're seeing instead is a cruelty so profound that women and girls will certainly suffer untold harm and, yes, even die. And it's not over. The abortion pill is now on the chopping block, and not just in red states, nationwide. Its fate now is in the hands of a far-right Trump-appointed judge in Texas, who is set to rule on a lawsuit that seeks to restrict access to a drug used to induce a medicated abortion. The drug is also used to treat miscarriages. Forced birth Republicans aren't just scaring doctors out of helping these women, but also corporations. Walgreens has just announced that it will not sell abortion pills in several states where abortion remains legal. The move comes after Republican attorneys general in 20 states sent Walgreens a letter saying the company could face legal consequences if it sold abortion medication in those states. Joining me now is Mini Tamaraju, president of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, and Michelle Goldberg, columnist for the New York Times and an MSNBC contributor. And Minnie, I do want to start with you. I heard you earlier speaking with my friend Nicole that, you know, the thing that is, there's so much that's shocking here, but that a corporation like Walgreens would take proactive steps out of fear of legal recourse and actually upset its own bottom line rather than fight for its own bottom line in terms of this abortion pill. If we're starting to see corporations fold and cave in to this forced birth movement. Who lines up in defense of women?
It's really troubling. And I think, we have to have some pretty tough conversations with our friends at Walgreens, who just recently committed to following other FDA guidance and releasing the abortion pill and distributing it in brick and mortar pharmacies. There's a larger problem, I think, with corporate America, frankly, being intimidated by these GOP extremist lawmakers. And it's really important, I think, a couple of points. One, it's really important for Democrats to call the question and call their corporate allies and friends and say, what's going on? Why aren't you engaged in this fight? I'll give you an example. In this Texas medication abortion case that would undermine FDA authority and really shake up the entire pharmaceutical industry, Pharma did not file an amicus brief, and we're really wondering why. And so there's a lot of big questions for what corporate America can and should do in this moment. But we also have to pay attention to the fact that Republican lawmakers are going to extremes to intimidate the private sector. And it's working. They're flinching with everything from, diversity initiatives in states like Texas and Florida, and now this. So we really have to ask, I think shareholders have to really demand accountability, and the American people have to really think about what products and companies they support and what products they consume.
Right, because, Michelle Goldberg, it's not even a close call. When you ask Americans, do you want abortion to be legal? The vast majority of Americans, even Republican women, say yes, of course, men and women. Men don't necessarily want to be liable for pregnancies that they didn't plan either. Two-thirds of Americans agree that it actually should be legal. And yet you're seeing corporate America, rather than look at that majority, which is the majority of their customers, instead, they seem to be caving to the coercion. And so, still giving money to candidates who are anti-choice, who are pro-forced birth, and still, operating in ways when it comes to things like diversity and things like abortion that say we're more afraid of this coercive minority than we are of the majority. And I want to give you just a kind of example of the fact that even Republicans don't believe that coercion will really work in the end. On the one hand, they're saying, we're ordering you all to have babies. We want to increase the American-born population. And let's just be clear, not of people who look like me, of people who look like you, Michelle, all right? And we want to force that because women don't want to do it. Here's their new tactic. We're like, okay, coercion's not working. How about this? A Texas Republican wants to give tax breaks for having more kids, but only if you're in an opposite-sex marriage. Families with a quartet of kids, meaning 4 kids, will get a 40% tax cut. Got 10 kids, no property taxes at all. With this bill, Texas will start saying to couples, get married, stay married, and be fruitful and multiply, says Representative Brian Slayton of Royce City, Texas. Michelle, this sounds straight out of The Handmaid's Tale. That's a verse from the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. What they're saying is whether it's through coercion or that we got to pay you, we want women back in the 19th century.
Well, it's a carrot and a stick, right? And I think that we shouldn't be that surprised by corporate cowardice, right? Corporate America was never going to be a leader in the fight for social justice. At best, they can be at some points, kind of beholden to public opinion and public pressure. But what we've seen recently is, especially with Ron DeSantis in Florida, there's such greater Republican willingness, despite their ostensible devotion to the free market. You see such greater Republican willingness to use the power of the state to go after corporations. And corporations are timid and they're risk averse, and we're seeing them buckle. I mean, speaking of the majority, we just saw in Kansas, they had a referendum, an up and down referendum in a very conservative state. They made it very clear what the people of that state think about reproductive rights, but that hasn't stopped their attorney general from sending this letter threatening Walgreens and getting Walgreens to cave. A final thing I would say is that, this bill that's been proposed in Texas, they have legislation a lot like this in Hungary. And something that I've written about in a number of different contexts is the degree to which the American right is taking their cues from Viktor Orban. I think this is another example of that.
Well, I mean, if you want to go through with that, right? I mean, the governor of Florida, you want to talk about Viktor Orbanism, making bloggers who write about him register so that he can have some sort of registry of whoever's writing the things about him. So I guess he can impose some sort of penalty if you write something he doesn't like, having fines for it. It's all straight out of the fascist playbook and the Viktor Orban playbook. And it is interesting, Minnie, that there is this sort of larger story that ties in things like replacement theory, these sort of obsessions with LGBTQ people, obsessions with trans people. If you actually do the bigger story, it all goes back to this demographic panic. You know, we have right now children who are essentially working in this country as indentured servants. We could easily solve that. If you did an immigration bill, you could get the parents.